Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. The lantern glow through misty trees. Prologue: lanterns in the mist. The mountain village was almost hidden by the morning mist. At first glance, it seemed as though the world had shrunk to the narrow path. The faint outlines of the surrounding pines, and the distant murmur of a stream somewhere unseen. Yet within that mist, there was something alive, something that breathed in harmony with the villagers who called this place home. It was in this veil of white that Ren first saw the lanterns. They glowed faintly through the dense curtain of fog. Suspended from wooden posts at even intervals along the narrow path that wound upward toward the heart of the village. Their light was not harsh, not meant to pierce the darkness like a torch, but soft, almost shy, as though whispering rather than proclaiming. The lanterns swayed slightly in the mountain breeze, their glow flickering like fireflies caught in a dream. Ren paused to look at them. After weeks of wandering through mountain passes and lonely roads, there was something almost unreal in this sight. He lifted his pack higher onto his shoulders and took a careful step forward. The fog clung to his robes, damp and cool, and each step on the stone path echoed softly in the silence. The village itself appeared slowly, like a painting revealed with the brush's slow sweep. Wooden houses with dark tiled roofs emerged from the mist, their eaves heavy with dew. The faint smell of pine resin and hearth smoke lingered in the air. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the haze, and the answering bark of a dog carried gently through the stillness. But above all, it was the lanterns that guided him. Their presence was steady, leading him deeper into the village's heart. Ren stopped at the entrance, where a small shrine stood beside an ancient cedar tree. A single lantern hung from the torii gate, its surface painted with calligraphy that seemed to dance in the flickering light. He bowed instinctively, though he did not yet know the deity worshipped here, and whispered a silent greeting. The mist thickened, curling around the shrine and the lantern's glow until both seemed part of the same dream. It was then that Ren felt the first stirring of something unusual, an awareness that this place was not simply another village in the mountains, but something older, something that carried a memory of countless generations. The lantern's light pulsed faintly, reflected in Ren's eyes. He breathed deeply, letting the stillness settle into him. The journey that had brought him here was one of wandering and uncertainty, but within the lantern glow through misty trees. He felt, for the first time in years, the possibility of belonging. Chapter 1: The Path Beneath Pines. The path into the village ran between towering pines. Their trunks rose like pillars into the mist, their needles forming a canopy that filtered the weak morning light. Dew clung to every surface, on branches, on stone walls, on the wooden railings that lined the path. When the wind stirred, droplets fell like tiny jewels, catching briefly in the lantern light before vanishing into the soil. Wren walked slowly, as though each step should be measured, respectful. He noticed how the villagers moved differently here. An old woman carried a basket of greens, her pace unhurried, her posture straight. A child ran along the edge of the path but slowed when he neared the lanterns, as if even in play he understood they were not to be disturbed. The mist had a way of softening all things: voices, footsteps, even the sound of the stream. Yet the lanterns remained clear, their glow untouched by the fog. Wren wondered if it was simply the oil within them or if something more, something unseen, sustained their quiet flame. As he passed a small tea stall near the path, the owner, a man with hair streaked with gray, greeted him with a bow. "Traveler, you've come far," he said gently. "The mountain roads are not easy." Wren returned the bow. "The mist guided me," he answered with a faint smile. The stall owner gestured for him to sit. "Then the lanterns welcomed you. They always do, if one walks with patience." Wren accepted the invitation, setting down his pack and warming his hands over the small brazier placed between them. The tea was fragrant with roasted barley, its warmth a comfort after the chill of the mist. They drank in silence for a while, the only sound the quiet rustle of wind moving through the pines. Finally, Wren asked, "These lanterns, they seem to carry more than light. What do they mean to the village?" The man's expression softened, touched by memory. "They are older than any of us. Each season, we tend to them. Each year, we replace their wood and their paper, but their flame is something we inherit. My grandfather used to say the lanterns hold the spirit of the mountain. In mist, their glow is a promise that the path still exists, even when sight alone would fail." Wren listened intently. The words resonated with him, echoing something deep within. He thought of the many paths he had walked, the places where direction had vanished, where only instinct had guided him forward. Perhaps here, in this village, he had found not just another path, but a way of seeing. The tea stall owner studied him quietly before speaking again. "If you stay long enough, traveler, you will see the Lantern Festival. When the mist is thickest, the lights are brightest. The whole village becomes like a dream." Wren bowed his head slightly. "Then perhaps my journey has brought me here for that reason." He rose and continued along the pine-shaded path. The lanterns swayed gently above him, their glow unchanged, as though they had been waiting for his arrival. Ahead, the village spread out more clearly now, its houses arranged along winding lanes that followed the curve of the hillside. A larger shrine stood at the center, its red gates vivid even against the mist. From within came the faint sound of a drum, steady and grounding, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Wren paused again, letting the sight settle into him. The mist, the pines, the lanterns, the people, everything here moved with a rhythm he had not known he was searching for. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling the pine-scented air, and felt the beginning of something shift within him. The lantern glow through misty trees was not simply a scene, it was a lesson. One that whispered of patience, presence, and the quiet strength of light amid uncertainty. Ren stepped forward, ready to learn what this hidden village had to teach. Chapter 2: Whispers of the Village. Ren soon learned that the village was unlike any other he had visited on his long journey. Each morning began with the slow clearing of mist, though it never vanished entirely. The pines seemed to guard the village in silence, and the lanterns glowed even in daylight, faint but steady. The villagers themselves moved with a rhythm that felt older than time. Farmers walked to their fields in unhurried steps, carrying tools that had been passed down for generations. Children fetched water from the stream, bowing politely to each passerby. The scent of wood smoke drifted from kitchens, mingling with the pine-sweet air. Ren wandered the narrow lanes, speaking with those who would answer his questions. What he found was not merely hospitality but a quiet trust, as though the villagers recognized something in him, perhaps his weariness, or perhaps his longing. One afternoon, Ren came upon a craftsman sitting beneath a persimmon tree, carving patterns into a wooden lantern frame. The man's hands moved with patient precision, his knife tracing curves and spirals that seemed less carved than revealed. "You have a steady hand," Ren remarked. The craftsman smiled without looking up. "The wood tells me how it wishes to be shaped. If I force it, the lantern will not last." Ren sat nearby, watching the shavings fall like thin curls of snow. "And when the lantern is complete, it becomes part of the path." "Yes. Each family tends a lantern, passing it down as they pass down their name. But there is more." The craftsman's eyes lifted briefly, meeting Ren's. "The flame that fills the lantern is said to come from the first fire that burned in this village, long before memory. To us, it is not merely light. It is continuity." The word lingered in Ren's thoughts. Continuity. He thought of his own life, marked not by continuity but by departure after departure, never lingering long enough to let roots take hold. He felt a faint ache at the thought, though he did not name it aloud. As the days passed, Ren began to notice how often the villagers spoke of the mountain as though it were alive. The stream was its voice, the pines its guardians, the mist its breath. The lanterns, they said, were the mountain's eyes, watching and guiding. One evening, an elder invited Ren to sit by the hearth. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks into the dark. The elder's voice, low and deliberate, carried the weight of memory. "Long ago," he began, "the mist here was darker, heavy with fear. Travelers lost their way, never to return. The village itself seemed always on the edge of vanishing. But one night, a wanderer like you came and lit a lantern from the fire of his own heart. Wherever he placed it, the mist receded. The villagers tended that flame, and so we live still." Ren listened, the story echoing strangely close to his own arrival. "And do you believe the flame still carries that wanderer's heart?" The elder smiled faintly. "Belief is not required. The light has never failed us." The heart's glow flickered across Ren's face, and in that moment, he felt both comfort and unease. For the first time, he wondered if the path that had led him here had not been his own choosing at all. Chapter 3: The Festival of Lanterns. It was on the 15th night after Ren's arrival that the festival began. By then, the mist had thickened with the changing season, rolling in like a living sea. The villagers moved with purpose, preparing offerings and adorning each lantern with fresh paper. Painted in calligraphy or simple brush strokes of pine, cranes, or waves. Ren helped where he could, carrying bundles of bamboo, trimming wicks, stringing cords. Yet more often, he found himself simply watching, entranced by the way each villager seemed to know their role without needing instruction. Even the children were solemn as they carried small lanterns shaped like lotus flowers. When evening fell, the village transformed. Every path, every bridge, every gate glowed with lantern light. The mist turned golden, flowing around the trees like a veil of silk. Bells chimed from the central shrine, deep and resonant, guiding the villagers into a procession. Ren walked among them, though he felt less a participant than a witness. He noticed the quiet harmony in their movements. The way no voice rose louder than another, no step hurried. The lanterns swayed with the rhythm of their breathing, as though all were bound together by a single pulse. At the shrine, the head priest lifted a lantern taller than a man. Its frame was carved with pines and waves, its paper painted with a great moon. The priest's voice, solemn and steady, carried over the gathering. "May the flame guide us through mist and shadow. May it remind us of what endures." One by one, families lit their lanterns from the central flame. The glow spread like ripples on water until the entire village was alight. Ren held his own small lantern gifted to him by the craftsman he had met earlier, and as he lifted it, he felt the weight of something greater than ritual. The procession wound through the pines, each lantern casting trembling halos in the mist. When the villagers reached the stream, they placed lanterns upon the water. The current carried them slowly, their reflections doubling the light until the surface seemed to dissolve into fire. Ren watched, breath caught in his chest. The mist rose, the pines loomed, and yet the lanterns fragile, fleeting shone undiminished. For the first time in years, he felt not like a wanderer but like part of a whole, his small light joining countless others. He whispered to the flame, though no one heard, "Perhaps this is where I was meant to arrive." The lantern drifted from his hands, joining the river of light that carried the village's hopes into the unseen night. Chapter 4: Shadows After the Flame. The morning after the festival was hushed, as though the village itself were catching its breath. The mist had thickened again, curling through the pines like smoke. Yet the paths were littered with faint traces of ash, the only remnants of lanterns that had floated downstream and vanished into the night. Ren rose early, wandering along the narrow lanes. He half expected to find the villagers weary, drained by the long vigil. Instead, he found them quietly tending to their fields, sweeping their gates, repairing the lanterns for the next year. There was no sense of ending, only continuation. As he passed the stream, Ren paused. A single lantern, battered and half-sunk, had drifted back to shore. Its paper was torn, the calligraphy washed away. And yet, impossibly, the small flame inside still burned. He crouched to study it, the fragile light trembling in the mist. The craftsman's words returned to him. The flame that fills the lantern is said to come from the first fire. Ren touched the edge of the wood, and in that instant, an image flickered in his mind, an old path winding through pines, a shrine hidden deep within, and a woman's voice, soft but urgent. "Do not forget what you carry." He staggered back, the vision gone. The flame sputtered once, then went out, leaving only smoke curling into the cold air. When he asked the villagers about the hidden shrine, their expressions grew distant. Some shook their heads, others murmured that no such place existed. Only the elder gave a cryptic answer. "The mountain remembers. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it tests." Ren could not rest. That night, beneath the swaying lantern outside his lodging, he resolved to seek the path himself. Chapter 5: The Hidden Path. The following dawn, Ren left the village without telling anyone. The mist clung thickly, muffling his steps, but he trusted his instinct, retracing the vision that had come to him by the stream. The pines grew denser as he walked, their branches knitting together to block the pale sky. The forest floor was silent except for the crunch of his sandals and the occasional call of a distant bird. Hours passed, though time seemed to dissolve in the shifting haze. At last, he noticed a break in the trees, a narrow trail, half swallowed by moss and fallen needles. The air along the path was colder, sharper, as though he had stepped into another world. Ren followed it deeper, his breath clouding before him. Then he saw it, a small stone bridge, worn smooth by centuries, arching over a stream so clear it seemed invisible. Beyond the bridge, half hidden by mist, stood a shrine no larger than a hut. Its roof sagged, but its lanterns, ancient, cracked, still glowed faintly. As he approached, the wind stirred, and with it came the sound of bamboo chimes, though no chimes hung nearby. The sound rose and fell like a voice carried through the trees. Ren bowed before the shrine, his heart unsteady. "What is it that you want me to see?" he whispered. The flame within the shrine's central lantern flared suddenly, casting long shadows across the stones. In those shadows, Ren glimpsed scenes not of his own life but of countless wanderers before him, each arriving weary, each leaving something behind. A fragment of sorrow, a burden of longing, a flame of memory. The voices of the pines seemed to converge, forming words that trembled in the air. You are not the first. You will not be the last. Carry the flame forward." Ren fell to his knees. For so long, he had thought of himself as rootless, a man with no place to return. Yet here, in the hidden shrine among the pines, he realized to carry the flame was not to belong to a single place, but to belong to the continuity itself. He rose slowly, touched the lantern, and felt warmth spread through his chest. It was not possession, nor command, it was inheritance. When he turned back toward the village, the path seemed clearer, the mist gentler. The burden of wandering had not left him, but it had shifted. He was no longer walking only for himself. Chapter 6: The Long Return. The path back from the hidden shrine felt different, though Ren knew it was the same trail. Each pine tree seemed to bow slightly, its branches whispering with the faintest wind. Where before he had felt lost, he now felt accompanied, as though unseen presences walked at his side. By the time he reached the outskirts of the village, the mist had begun to lift, and for the first time in weeks the sun broke through. Its light was gentle, filtered by drifting clouds, yet it revealed details Ren had never noticed: the fine stitching of the villagers' clothes, the small carvings on the eaves of houses, the way the moss on the stones glistened like jade. Children ran through the lanes, chasing each other with sticks that still bore remnants of festival lanterns. The old craftsman waved from his workshop, his hands stained with soot, already repairing new frames. The elder sat beneath the gate, watching Ren with knowing eyes. "You went to the mountain," she said, not as a question. Ren bowed. "I saw the shrine." The elder nodded slowly, her voice hushed as though speaking of a dream. "Then you carry it now." He hesitated. "What am I meant to do with it?" "Live," the elder replied simply. "Live so that the flame is not forgotten." That evening, Ren joined the villagers in their simple meal of rice and pickled vegetables. The taste was plain, but he felt as though every grain was alive, grown from soil that remembered centuries of hands. Laughter rose around him, unhurried, as though time itself had softened in this place. And when the mist drifted in once more, he no longer feared it. He saw instead the lanterns of the past and future, floating together, their light overlapping in the endless dusk. Epilogue: The Eternal Glow. Years later, travelers spoke of a wanderer who often visited the small mountain village. Sometimes staying through the seasons, sometimes vanishing into distant roads. They said he carried no wealth, only a lantern of unusual design, its frame patched with care, its paper replaced often, but its flame never extinguished. Some whispered that it was the very same flame from the first lantern ever lit in the village. Others said it was simply the fire of an ordinary man who had learned to see the world differently. When asked, Ren would smile but not answer. He walked the roads as before, through misty forests and along rivers where fireflies gathered, across stone bridges where autumn leaves clung. Yet wherever he went, people remembered the lantern's glow, soft, steady, neither grand nor weak, but enduring. One spring night, he returned once more to the mountain village. The cherry blossoms had just begun to fall, scattering petals across the stream. Children lit new lanterns, their hands clumsy yet eager. The elder, now frail, sat near the gate, her eyes clouded yet shining. Wren knelt beside her. "The flame is still with me." She placed her hand over his, fragile as parchment. "It was never yours alone. It belongs to all who walk with light in the mist." Later, as darkness fell, the villagers once again released their lanterns. The river carried them slowly into the haze, their reflections doubling the glow. Wren stood among them, his lantern held high, and for the first time, he understood the mist was not to obscure, but to soften, to remind that what was most important was not always seen clearly, but felt, carried, and shared. The lanterns floated farther and farther, their glow fading into the white embrace of the mist. Yet even as they vanished from sight, their presence remained in the hearts of those who had watched. And so, in the quiet mountain village, through the unending cycles of mist and flame, the story continued, not of one man, not of one night, but of a light that endures, humble and eternal, beneath the pines. The Song of the Evening Crickets. Prologue. The first notes in the dusk. The last warmth of summer lingered in the air, though the evenings had already begun to soften into autumn. A faint golden haze stretched across the rice paddies, their stalks bending heavy with grain, whispering against one another in a rhythm older than memory. Wren, a young traveler, paused on the narrow earthen path that wound through the fields. He had been walking since noon, the sun at his back, and now his legs carried the faint ache of distance. But it was not fatigue that made him stop, it was the sound. From the edge of the paddies, beneath the shade of a cluster of persimmon trees, came a delicate chorus. The voices were small, fragile, yet insistent. They rose and fell like waves on a distant shore, weaving together until the air itself seemed alive. The evening crickets were singing. At first, Wren thought of them as mere background, the ordinary hum of nature. But as the last light deepened into amber and violet, their sound grew more distinct. It was not noise, but a song measured, subtle, each note carrying an intimacy that stirred something unspoken in him. He closed his eyes. The world faded until there was nothing but the chorus, steady, tireless, neither joyous nor sorrowful, but balanced between both. It reminded him of things he could not name, a childhood he barely remembered, a sense of belonging he had not felt in years, the rhythm of seasons that moved forward regardless of human hands. When he opened his eyes, the sky had darkened. The first lanterns of the village flickered in the distance, small orange fires that beckoned him forward. Somewhere in the mist that began to gather, the crickets continued their song, as though guiding him toward something he had not yet discovered. Wren tightened the strap of his travel pack and resumed walking, each step lighter than before. The song followed him, slipping between the reeds, climbing the stones, blending with the faint ripple of water. It was not the end of a journey, he realized, but the beginning. Chapter 1: The Path by the Stream. The village lay nestled against the foot of the mountain, its houses of wood and thatch arranged like quiet companions along the stream. A small wooden bridge arched over the water, its beams weathered smooth by countless feet. Lanterns hung from its posts, their flames reflected in the ripples below. Ren crossed slowly, pausing midway. Beneath him, the stream ran clear, carrying fallen leaves that spun like little boats. The air smelled faintly of smoke, as though someone nearby had just finished cooking their evening rice. On the far side of the bridge, voices drifted through the dusk. Children laughed, their silhouettes darting between the reeds. Ren approached and found them crouched by the water's edge, their eyes wide, their hands cupped against the earth. "Look, look!" one boy cried. "I caught it." He opened his palms just enough for the others to see. Inside was a cricket, its slender legs folded, its wings trembling in protest. The children gasped in awe, then giggled when the insect escaped, leaping into the grass and vanishing. Ren smiled despite himself. "You shouldn't keep them too long," he said gently. "They sing better when they're free." The children turned to look at him. For a moment, they studied him with the cautious curiosity reserved for strangers. Then the smallest girl tilted her head. "Are you a traveler?" "Yes," Ren replied. "Just passing through." "Then you must listen carefully," she said with surprising seriousness. "The crickets here are different. Grandmother says they remember things. They carry the voices of people who came before." Ren raised his brows. "Voices?" She nodded. "When the crickets sing, it's like the old stories. If you listen long enough, you can hear them." The other children giggled again, embarrassed by her earnestness, and soon ran off chasing each other into the twilight. But the little girl stayed by the reeds, watching the grass sway. Ren crouched beside her. The chorus of crickets was louder here, rising from every patch of grass and hollow in the earth. Their sound blended into one seamless thread, a tapestry of notes that seemed endless. "Do you believe it?" he asked. The girl thought for a moment, then nodded again. "I think the crickets remember better than people. People forget when they get older. But crickets sing every year." Her words lingered in Ren's mind as he rose and continued into the village. Perhaps she was right. He thought of the way the sound had stirred him earlier, how it had seemed to awaken something long buried. Perhaps memory did not belong only to the mind, but to the land, the air, the voices of even the smallest creatures. The village greeted him with a calm simplicity. Wooden shutters creaked as they were closed for the night. A dog barked once, then quieted. From one house came the pluck of a shamisen, faint and slow, weaving through the air like another thread in the tapestry of sound. Ren found an inn at the center of the village, a modest building with paper lanterns glowing at its entrance. The innkeeper welcomed him with a bow and offered a bowl of hot tea. As he drank, Ren sat by the window. Outside, the night deepened, and with it the chorus of crickets swelled. It seemed to fill every hollow of the earth, every space of the sky, until even the silence between notes became meaningful. Ren listened long into the night, and though he could not understand the words, if indeed there were words, he felt as though he was not alone. The crickets sang of endings and beginnings, of seasons turning, of lives passing gently like leaves on a stream. And somewhere, beneath their unending song, he thought he heard the faintest echo of himself. Chapter 2: The Storyteller's Porch. The following morning dawned misty, the mountains veiled in a pale shroud that softened their edges. Ren woke early in the inn, the faint memory of cricket song still echoing in his ears. After a simple breakfast of rice and pickles, he stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine resin. The village was slowly waking. Farmers bent to tie their sandals, women carried buckets of water from the stream, and smoke curled from chimneys as fires were kindled for the day's cooking. Ren wandered without hurry, content to watch. Near the edge of the village stood an old man seated on a porch. His hair was white, his back slightly bent, but his eyes shone clear as polished stones. Around him sat 3 children, listening with solemn faces as he spoke. Ren paused, unwilling to disturb. Yet the old man noticed him and beckoned with a hand. "Traveler, come closer," he said. "No story should be half heard." Ren approached and bowed slightly. The children shifted to make space for him on the porch. "What story is this?" Ren asked. The old man's lips curled into a faint smile. "The story of the crickets, of course. These little ones asked me why they sing so tirelessly." He tapped his cane gently against the floorboards, then began again, his voice a low murmur that carried more weight than volume. "Long ago, before the mountains took their present shape, there was a spirit who wandered alone. This spirit was neither man nor beast, neither bird nor fish. It was simply a voice that longed to be heard. The spirit tried to speak to the rivers, but the waters rushed too loudly. It whispered to the trees, but the wind drowned it out. It called to people, but they were too busy with their own lives to notice. So, the spirit grew small. Smaller than a sparrow, smaller than a leaf. Finally, it became cricket. Though its body was tiny, its voice carried the same longing. Night after night, it sings not to be answered, but simply to remind the world that no voice is ever truly lost." The children leaned forward, eyes wide. Ren felt a stillness settle over him as the words sank deep. "That is why," the old man concluded, "we listen. Not because the cricket song is grand or beautiful, but because it carries the spirit of longing itself. And sometimes, if your heart is quiet enough, you may hear your own forgotten voice within it." The children nodded solemnly. One girl clapped her hands softly, as if to honor the story. The old man turned his gaze to Ren. "You look as though you've heard them before," he said knowingly. Ren hesitated. Last night, by the stream. Their sound felt familiar, as if it belonged not only to the night, but also to me. The old man chuckled. Then the crickets have already begun their work. He said no more, only looked out toward the mist where the fields glistened under the rising sun. Chapter 3: The Lantern Festival. By evening, the village stirred with anticipation. Lanterns of every size were hung from the eaves of houses and across the bridge. Their paper skins glowed in shades of white, red, and gold. Children darted about, carrying smaller lanterns shaped like fish or rabbits, their laughter rising like sparks into the night. Wren followed the stream to where the villagers gathered. Long wooden tables were set with bowls of steaming noodles and grilled fish. The air was thick with the scent of soy and smoke, mingled with the faint perfume of chrysanthemums placed in vases along the path. The innkeeper greeted Wren warmly and offered him a place near the water. Tonight, she explained, we release lanterns upon the stream. They carry our prayers, our memories, and our thanks for the year that has passed. As the sun sank, the crickets began their chorus again, stronger than the night before, as if eager to join the celebration. Their sound filled the spaces between the chatter, the clatter of dishes, the strumming of shamisen. When darkness had fully fallen, the first lanterns were lit. One by one, villagers lowered them into the stream. They floated gently, their flames trembling but unyielding. Soon, the water was alive with drifting light, like a constellation fallen from the heavens. Wren received a lantern of his own, plain and unmarked. He held it carefully, feeling the fragile texture of the paper. "What do I write?" he asked. The innkeeper smiled. "Whatever lingers in your heart. A wish, a memory, even a name. The river will carry it, and the crickets will remember." Wren stared at the blank lantern. For a long time, his brush hovered without moving. Then, slowly, he wrote a single word: Mother. He released the lantern into the stream. It drifted among the others, its glow mingling with the shared prayers of the village. Wren watched until it disappeared into the bend of the river, carried away by the current. The crickets sang louder then, their voices weaving with the flickering lights. In that moment, Wren felt something lift within him, a weight he had not realized he carried. It was as though the chorus itself had acknowledged his word, held it gently, and promised not to forget. The villagers clapped in rhythm, the shamisen quickened, and laughter rang through the night. Yet beneath all the brightness and sound, Wren kept listening. The crickets did not falter. Their song was steady, eternal, like the heartbeat of the earth. For the first time in many years, Wren smiled not only with his lips but with his whole being. Chapter 4: The Silent Garden. The morning after the Lantern Festival, the village was quieter than usual. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, and the stream ran clear, as though the night's floating prayers had washed it clean. Yet Wren felt the pulse of the cricket's song lingering in the air, echoing even in the hush of daylight. The innkeeper suggested he visit the old temple on the hill, a place where villagers often went to offer incense and reflection. Ren climbed the stone steps slowly, each one worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims. At the top, a moss-covered gate opened into a garden. The garden was simple raked gravel, a few weathered stones, and an ancient pine whose branches bent gracefully toward the earth. A basin of water reflected the morning sky, and beside it stood a bell that looked as though it had not been struck in years. Ren entered quietly. The air seemed to hold its breath. He sat upon a stone bench and closed his eyes. In the silence, he heard them, the crickets, faint but unmistakable, hidden in the shadows of the garden. Their song rose and fell with measured rhythm, not loud, but steady. It felt as if they were guiding him inward, toward a memory he had long avoided. Ren saw his mother again, kneeling at a hearth, her hands folded in her lap. She had often paused in the evenings to listen to the insects outside their home. "They sing as if time has no hold on them," she once said. "Listen, Ren. Their voices will outlast ours." He remembered how he had brushed off her words, too young to understand. And yet here he was, decades later, sitting alone, hearing them just as she once had. His throat tightened. He whispered into the air, "Are you listening, Mother? I finally hear them." A breeze stirred the pine branches, scattering needles across the gravel. The crickets continued their chorus. For a moment, Ren felt as if the world itself leaned closer, listening with him. He bowed his head deeply, not as a tourist, but as a son returning to something sacred. Chapter 5: The Traveler's Confession. That evening, Ren returned to the inn. The village children were again gathered on the porch of the storyteller, laughing and playing in the twilight. The old man greeted Ren with a nod. "You've walked to the temple," he said, more as a statement than a question. Ren sat with him, the day's reflections heavy in his chest. After a silence, he spoke. "I left my home many years ago. I traveled to cities, worked among strangers, and carried burdens I thought were important. But I never went back. I never told her goodbye." The old man's eyes softened. "And now you fear it is too late." Ren nodded. "Last night, I wrote her name on the lantern. Tonight, I heard her voice in the crickets. But I still feel unfinished. As if I owe her more." The old man tapped his cane on the porch. "The living and the departed do not walk the same paths. But there are bridges. The lantern was one. The crickets are another. Perhaps your journey is to listen long enough until you become a bridge yourself." Ren frowned slightly. "A bridge?" The old man smiled faintly. "A man who carries remembrance into each step, each word. That is how the past speaks to the present. That is how voices are not lost." The children, sensing the gravity of the conversation, sat unusually still. One of them, a boy with wide eyes, asked if the crickets carry voices. Then what happens when winter comes and they die? The old man looked at him kindly. "They rest beneath the earth, waiting. When spring returns, so does their song. Just as we rest, and return, in ways unseen. The boy nodded slowly, satisfied. Wren looked out toward the darkening fields. Already, the first notes of the crickets had begun again, faint and persistent. He realized then that he had been listening not only to insects, but to a language older than memory. One that had always been present, waiting for him to understand. For the first time, his heart felt less heavy. Chapter 6: The Farewell Path. The following morning, Wren prepared to leave the village. His pack was light, for he carried little besides clothing, a notebook, and the faint scent of incense clinging to his sleeves. Yet his heart felt fuller than when he had first arrived. The innkeeper bowed deeply. "Come again when the crickets sing. The mountains remember every step." Wren returned the bow with equal reverence. He passed along the familiar path beneath the pines. The mist still clung to the air, curling in pale ribbons between the trunks. Each step carried the echo of countless pilgrims who had walked before him. Midway down the path, he paused. There, on a moss-covered stone, a cricket chirped alone, its note piercing the silence. It seemed to call directly to him. Wren crouched, watching the tiny creature, and whispered, "I will carry your song." The cricket leapt into the grass, vanishing, but its voice lingered. Wren felt as though it had planted something in his chest, a seed that would not wither with winter. When he resumed walking, his stride was steadier, as though he had finally found his rhythm. Chapter 7: The Return. Wren's journey back to the city felt different. The streets no longer seemed as harsh, nor the lights as unforgiving. Wherever he went, he carried the memory of lanterns floating on the stream, of the quiet temple garden, of children sitting wide-eyed before the storyteller. And at night, even in the noise of the city, he began to notice them, the faint, almost imperceptible chirping of crickets hiding in the cracks of stone walls or small gardens behind buildings. Their voices were not drowned out, they only required patient ears. One evening, he sat on his balcony overlooking a busy street. The sounds of traffic, conversation, and footsteps filled the air. Yet beneath them, steady and resilient, he heard it, the song of the evening crickets. For the first time, Wren smiled without sorrow. He realized that his mother's voice was not lost, nor bound to a single place. It lived in him, carried through each note of the insect's chorus. It would remain as long as he remembered to listen. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm home, Mother." Epilogue: The Eternal Song. Years later, villagers still told the story of a traveler who had come to their mountains. Silent and heavy-hearted, and left lighter, carrying the song of the crickets within him. Some said he returned each autumn, though never announced, blending quietly into the festival crowd. Others claimed they saw him walking the temple path at dawn, pausing to bow before the garden gate. Whether true or not, the crickets sang each year without fail. Their song rose through mist and moonlight, through lantern glow and winter silence, through the laughter of children and the prayers of the old. It was a song that did not belong to one man, one family, or one village. It belonged to all who paused to hear it, to all who carried memory in their hearts. And so the world continued to turn beneath the evening sky, the crickets singing tirelessly, whispering to each ear willing to listen. We are here. We have always been here. Footsteps on the frosted stone path. Prologue: the first frost. The air of late autumn was thin, sharp, and carried the faint scent of smoke from distant hearths. Morning had not yet fully broken, yet the mountain path was already painted in pale silver. Frost covered the stones that lined the old path, each one etched with delicate crystals that caught the faint glimmer of moonlight. Ren tightened the scarf around his neck and exhaled. His breath rose like a small cloud before dispersing into the cold. Each step he took pressed against the frozen stone, and the sound of his footfalls echoed softly through the stillness of dawn. Katsu, katsu. The sound was neither intrusive nor loud, rather, it became part of the silence itself, as though the mountain welcomed it. The path was ancient. Generations of villagers and travelers had walked it, their journeys etched into the stones by countless seasons. Ren thought of the people before him, their hopes, burdens, and prayers all pressed into the same frosted earth beneath his feet. Now, he too was part of that story, even if only for a fleeting morning. At the edge of the path, skeletal trees stood motionless, their branches coated with frost. Here and there, leaves that had refused to fall glistened like glass, their veins outlined in white. Farther down, the first faint glow of the sun brushed the ridge, and soon the mountain would awaken. But for now, it was only him, his footsteps, and the frost. Ren paused, gazing at the long stone path stretching ahead. It seemed endless, disappearing into mist that drifted low across the mountainside. He bowed his head slightly, as though greeting an unseen companion, and whispered, "Guide me." Then he stepped forward again, his footsteps ringing clearly in the silence of the first frost. Chapter 1: The Village in Winter's Breath. By the time the sun had climbed high enough to warm the ridges, Ren reached the small mountain village that lay cradled within the valley. From afar, the village appeared as a scattering of thatched roofs and tiled eaves, smoke rising lazily from chimneys into the crystalline sky. The frost, though melting in places, still clung to the shaded corners of the stone walls and steps, sparkling like hidden jewels. The villagers were already at work. A man split logs near the edge of the path, his axe striking with steady rhythm. Women spread straw mats to dry in the cold light, their hands moving quickly despite the chill. Children, bundled in layers of fabric, ran after one another, their laughter rising in little bursts of mist. Ren walked slowly, observing. Though he had passed through many towns and villages on his journey, this place felt different. It was neither hurried nor stagnant. Instead, it moved in harmony with the frost and sun, as though the breath of winter had settled upon it without resistance. At the village square, he paused before a large stone basin filled with water. A thin sheet of ice coated its surface, and villagers broke it carefully each morning to fetch water. Today, an elderly woman leaned over the basin, tapping the ice with a wooden ladle. She noticed Ren and gave him a smile that reached her eyes. "You're traveling, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft, like the rustle of dried leaves. Ren bowed politely. "Yes. The path led me here. The morning frost was beautiful." The woman chuckled. "Beautiful, yes, but it bites too. Still, we are used to it. The frost tells us that winter has arrived, and so we prepare. Firewood, preserved food, straw sandals, all these little tasks begin when the stones whiten." She handed him a ladle of water after breaking the ice. Ren accepted gratefully, the cold liquid biting his lips and throat. Yet somehow, it felt refreshing, like it had gathered the purity of the frost itself. He spent the day among the villagers. A farmer showed him how bundles of rice straw were woven into ropes to be hung over doorways for protection through the season. A child led him to a frozen pond at the village's edge, where they skipped pebbles across the glassy surface. In the afternoon, he joined men carrying logs from the forest, the sharp scent of pine clinging to his sleeves. As the sun set, the village gathered for their evening meal. Around the communal hearth, steam rose from wooden bowls filled with hot miso soup, daikon radish, and mountain herbs. Ren sat quietly among them, listening to the gentle murmur of conversation. The crackling of the fire, and the faint hum of crickets still lingering in the cold. When he finally lay down to rest in a small guest room at the inn, he thought again of the frosted path. His footsteps that morning had led him here, to warmth and human connection. The frost had seemed cold, even lonely, but now he saw it differently. It was also a guide, pointing toward what awaited beyond the mist. Sleep came easily, carrying him into dreams of silver stones stretching endlessly into the winter night. Chapter 2: The Old Temple Bell. The following morning, Ren rose before dawn. The innkeeper had left a small tray by his room, a bowl of rice porridge and pickled plum, their simplicity reflecting the care of the household. He bowed in thanks, though no one was there to see, and stepped once more into the frosted air. The village was still asleep. Only faint smoke curled from chimneys, drifting into the deep blue of the pre-dawn sky. Above, stars still lingered like pale embers, and the moon hovered low, veiled in mist. Ren tightened his cloak and began to walk. His destination was the old temple, said to lie just beyond the cedar grove on the northern slope. The path wound upward through tall, silent trees. Frost clung to the needles of the cedars, catching what little light the moon gave. The sound of Ren's footsteps mingled with the occasional creak of frozen branches, a dialogue between man and forest. Soon, through the thinning mist, the silhouette of the temple emerged, its tiled roof bowed under frost, its wooden beams dark with age. At the entrance stood a stone guardian, half covered in moss. Beyond it, the temple courtyard opened wide, filled with stillness so profound it seemed the air itself was holding its breath. And there, suspended between wooden beams, hung the great temple bell. Its surface was green with patina, yet its presence radiated dignity, as if it had absorbed centuries of prayers and silences. Ren approached slowly. His breath rose in the cold, mingling with the faint mist that clung to the ground. He placed a hand gently on the bell's surface. It was colder than stone, and yet it pulsed faintly with something deeper memory, perhaps, or the weight of countless tolls that had echoed across this valley. An elderly monk emerged from the shadows of the hall. His robe was patched, yet clean, and his eyes were clear, reflecting the frost-bright morning. "You have come early," the monk said softly. Ren bowed. "The frost led me here." The monk studied him, then smiled faintly. "Few listen to the frost anymore. Most fear the cold and hurry past it. But you walked with it. That is why you found this place." He invited Ren inside, where a small fire glowed in the hearth. They sat facing each other, and the monk poured tea, its steam rising like incense. "This bell," the monk began, "was cast centuries ago. It has rung through storms, through winters of famine, and through times of joy. Each strike carried the prayers of villagers, their grief, their gratitude. Now, it rings only at dawn on the first day of the new year." Ren looked at the bell through the open door. "Does it not take long to be heard more often?" The monk's eyes softened. "Perhaps. But silence is also sound. In silence, we hear what we overlook: the crunch of frost, the rustle of pine, the echo of footsteps. The bell teaches us to listen even when it does not ring." Ren lowered his gaze, absorbing the words. He thought of his journey, of the sound of his own feet striking the frosted stones. Each step had been a small bell, echoing in the quiet. Before he left, the monk allowed him to strike the great bell once. Ren grasped the suspended wooden beam and pulled it gently forward. The moment it struck the bronze surface, the sound blossomed deep, resonant, and endless. It rolled across the valley, shaking frost from branches, rippling through the mist, until even silence seemed changed by it. Ren bowed low. The monk's voice followed him as he stepped back onto the stone path. "Walk carefully. Each step is a bell." Chapter 3: Memories Beneath the Frost. The days passed, and Ren lingered in the village longer than he had intended. The frost remained, though the sun now lingered a little longer each day. He helped villagers stack firewood, mend fences, and fetch water from the frozen basin. Yet each evening, as he walked the stone path alone, he felt the frost speaking to him, soft, persistent, urging him to remember. One afternoon, Ren wandered to the edge of the valley, where the path opened onto a ridge overlooking the river. The water flowed sluggishly, its surface fringed with ice. The bridge that crossed it was made of stone, its railings etched by time. As he stood there, memories stirred, unbidden. Years ago, he had walked a similar path with his father. He remembered the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder, the sound of laughter carried by the wind. He remembered the frost beneath their feet, glittering in the morning light. But most of all, he remembered the silence that followed after his father's passing. The way the frost had seemed colder, harsher, without him. Ren knelt by the river's edge. He traced a finger across the frozen stone, as though the act itself could bridge time. The frost stung his skin, yet he did not pull away. "Father," he whispered, his breath clouding the air. "I still walk the path." The wind answered by rustling the pines overhead. A few needles drifted down, settling on the ice like quiet offerings. That evening, he returned to the temple. The monk greeted him without words, as though sensing what weighed upon his heart. They sat again by the hearth, drinking tea. Finally, Ren spoke. "The frost reminds me of him. On mornings, we walked together. And of the silence after." The monk's gaze rested on the fire. "The frost remembers all footsteps. Those who walked before you, and those who will walk after. You are not alone, Ren. The stones beneath your feet carry them still." Ren felt his chest loosen, as though a knot had gently unraveled. For the first time in years, the memory of his father did not sting like ice. It shimmered like frost, delicate, fleeting, yet beautiful. That night, as he lay beneath the inn's roof, Ren dreamed not of endless paths, but of one clear step, his father's and his own, side by side upon frosted stone. Chapter 4: The Pilgrimage of Snow. Snow fell at last. Ren awoke to find the entire valley veiled in white. The roofs of the village houses were blanketed, the cedar branches bowed. And the frost that once gleamed alone had now surrendered to a deeper silence, the hush of snow. He stepped onto the path, his footprints sinking softly into its surface. Unlike frost, which crackled and sang beneath each step, the snow absorbed sound, leaving behind only a muffled echo. The world seemed wrapped in cloth, still and solemn. The villagers moved carefully through their morning routines, carrying wood, shoveling paths, and feeding livestock. Their laughter, though subdued, rose like smoke into the still air. Children threw snow at one another, their voices sharp and fleeting against the hush. Ren paused to watch, smiling faintly. Later, he set out toward the mountain ridge once more. The monk had spoken of a small shrine, long abandoned, hidden where the ridge met the forest's edge. Ren felt drawn to it, as though the snow itself was urging him forward. The climb was difficult. Snow weighed heavily on his cloak, and his steps slipped on the uneven path. Yet he pressed on, guided by the faint memory of his father's words. "Paths do not wait for us, they ask only that we walk." At last, he reached a clearing. There stood the shrine, its wooden beams weathered, its roof sagging, yet its presence dignified. Snow piled on its eaves, while icicles hung like crystal ornaments. The offering box was cracked, the rope frayed, but a faint aura lingered. as if countless prayers still echoed within its silence. Ren brushed snow from the steps and knelt. His hands came together, palms warm against the cold air. He bowed deeply, breathing a prayer not for himself alone but for the countless souls who had once knelt here, their hopes, their grief, their gratitude. As he bowed, the snow fell more heavily, swirling like white incense. For a moment, Ren felt the presence of others walking beside him, not only his father, but strangers of centuries past, pilgrims whose footsteps once pressed into the same frozen earth. The hush deepened, and in that stillness, Ren understood every journey was both solitary and shared. Each step left a trace, faint yet eternal, carried forward by stone, by frost, by snow. When he rose, he felt lighter. He left a coin in the cracked box, then turned back toward the village. The path was half covered already, his earlier steps nearly erased. Yet he smiled, for he knew erasure was not loss. The stone remembered. The frost remembered. The snow, too, would remember. Chapter 5: The Lantern Festival in Frost. By the time Ren returned, the village was alive with preparations. Lanterns were being strung across doorways, their paper thin as frost petals. Women carried bundles of straw to weave into ornaments, while men cleared paths for the evening's gathering. "What festival is this?" Ren asked the innkeeper as she served him hot broth. "It is the Festival of Light," she replied with a smile. "We hold it each winter, when nights are longest. Lanterns guide the spirits of our ancestors, reminding them that they are welcome still." Ren's heart stirred. He thought of the shrine, of the temple bell, of the frost beneath his father's footsteps. Yes, this was the festival he had been waiting for, though he had not known it until now. As twilight fell, the villagers gathered in the square. Lanterns glowed softly, their light wavering against the snow. Children carried smaller lanterns, giggling as they swung them gently. Old men sat by the fire, sipping sake and reciting poems of winter. The air was alive, yet hushed, as though the snow itself leaned closer to listen. The monk appeared, walking slowly, staff in hand. His robe was patched, but the lantern light made it glow faintly, as though lit from within. He raised a hand, and silence spread across the square. "We light these lanterns," he said, his voice deep, "to honor the unseen. Those who walked before us still walk beside us. Their footsteps are in the stones, their voices in the wind, their warmth in the fire we share." He lit the first lantern. The flame flickered, caught, and steadied. One by one, villagers lit theirs from it, until the square was a sea of soft light. The lanterns swayed gently in the night wind, casting golden halos on the snow. Ren stood at the edge, holding a lantern given to him by a child. He stared at the flame, small yet enduring. Slowly, he whispered, "For you, Father." He joined the procession as the villagers carried their lanterns through the frosted paths, past the stone bridge, toward the river's edge. When they set the lanterns afloat, The water carried them slowly, their reflections shimmering beneath. The river glowed like a thread of light stitched through the darkness. Ren's lantern drifted away, joining the others. For the first time in many years, he did not feel the weight of absence. Instead, he felt presence everywhere, in the snow, in the frost, in the flame. That night, as the lanterns faded downstream, the village returned to silence. Ren remained on the stone path long after others had gone, his breath rising in the cold air. He placed a hand on the frost-covered stone, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I will keep walking." And in the silence, he felt the stones whisper back. Chapter 6: The Dawn Beyond Frost. The days passed slowly, each one wrapped in snow. Ren lingered in the village longer than he had planned, drawn into its rhythm of silence and warmth. He helped the innkeeper chop wood, walked with children to gather kindling, and accompanied the monk on visits to the elderly. With every act, he felt a soft thread weaving him into the fabric of the place. Yet, one morning, as the snow clouds parted to reveal a pale blue sky, Ren knew it was time to move on. His journey had never been meant to end here. He had come seeking something, not an answer, but a path. The frost beneath his feet had whispered it to him from the beginning: keep walking. He rose before dawn and set out quietly. The village still slept, its roofs capped with snow, its paths dim with starlight. Only the faint glow of lanterns from the shrine lingered, as though guiding his way. The stone path stretched before him, covered in frost once again. His footsteps crackled softly. Each sound carried a memory: his father's voice, the laughter of children, the chant of the monk, the hush of the lantern festival. He carried them with him, not as weight, but as warmth. As the horizon brightened, Ren reached the ridge where the path opened to the valley. The snow sparkled, countless crystals scattering the first light of dawn. He stopped and looked back. The village lay beneath a veil of white, smoke rising gently from chimneys, lanterns still flickering faintly in the distance. He bowed deeply. Not to the village alone, but to all the steps that had brought him here, to his father's memory, to the frost and snow, to the silence of the stones. Then he turned forward. The path wound ahead, disappearing into pine forests heavy with snow. Beyond them, mountains waited, their peaks kissed by the rising sun. Ren's heart was steady. He took his first step into the new day, the frost singing beneath his feet. The journey was not over. It never would be. It was enough. Epilogue: the path that remains. Years later, when Ren's own hair had silvered and his hands had grown calloused from countless journeys, villagers spoke of him with quiet reverence. They said he was a wanderer who carried silence with him, a man whose steps never hurried, who paused to bow before shrines long forgotten. He never stayed long, yet he was remembered everywhere he went. Some recalled how he shared stories by the fire, his voice soft, his eyes glinting with something beyond sight. Others remembered the way he brushed snow from stone steps before kneeling in prayer, as if honoring not only the gods but the stones themselves. Children remembered his laughter, adults his patience. When he vanished one winter, no one knew where he had gone. Some believed he continued walking beyond the mountains. Others whispered he had become part of the frost itself, his footsteps forever echoing on the stone paths of the land. But on certain mornings, when the frost sparkles before the sun has risen, villagers claim they hear it, the faint, steady rhythm of footsteps. Not heavy, not hurried, but calm, as if guided by a presence both near and far. And when they bow to the frost, they feel it bow back. For paths never truly end. They remain, carried by stone, by snow, by silence, by those who walk, and those who remember. And somewhere, beyond sight, Ren walks still. The silent pine on the hill. Prologue: the pine in silence. On the far side of the village, beyond the winding paths of rice paddies and the flowing threads of a small river, there stood a hill. Its slope was gentle, yet its summit rose high enough to catch the first morning light and the last fading colors of the day. Atop this hill stood a solitary pine tree. Its trunk was tall and straight, its branches stretched in quiet dignity, and its needles whispered with the wind. The villagers called it Shizuka no Matsu, the silent pine. They believed it had stood there for centuries, perhaps since the first families settled in the valley below. No one knew who had planted it, or if it had sprouted of its own accord. Yet the pine seemed older than any shrine, older than the oldest stone markers by the roadside. When the wind blew across the hill, the pine made no grand gestures. Its boughs did not thrash wildly, nor did it groan under storms. It simply stood, absorbing the seasons. Snow piled upon its branches in winter, blossoms fell around it in spring. Cicadas cried beneath it in summer, and crimson leaves swirled at its roots in autumn. Always, the pine remained. Children ran up the hill to play in its shade. Young lovers carved their promises into the bark of stones nearby. Elders climbed slowly, resting at its base to gaze upon the village below. The pine watched them all, saying nothing. Its silence was not emptiness, but fullness, the kind of silence that gathers stories, holds them, and releases them gently into the wind. It was here, under the silent pine, that the story of Ren would unfold. A boy born in the village, restless in heart, would one day find himself climbing the hill, searching for something he could not name. The pine, still and listening, would become both companion and mirror, guiding him not through words, but through the silence of time itself. Chapter 1: The Path to the Hill. Ren was 13 when he first began walking to the hill alone. He had seen it since childhood. Everyone in the village had, but until then it had been nothing more than a familiar shape on the horizon, a green silhouette rising beyond the paddies. It was early spring when the impulse struck him. The snow in the fields had melted, leaving small rivulets of water that shimmered in the morning sun. His mother was hanging laundry behind their house, white cloths swaying in the breeze. His father, a fisherman, was away on the river. Ren finished his chores quickly and slipped out, his sandals clapping softly against the damp earth. The path to the hill wound through the village lanes, past neighbors tending their gardens. Some greeted him, others simply nodded, accustomed to seeing children wander. But when the houses fell behind and the path opened into fields, Ren felt something shift. The air grew quieter, filled only with the sounds of sparrows and the steady trickle of water. The hill rose ahead, not imposing but steady. Its slope was covered with grass, just turning green again after the winter. The pine at its crest caught the sunlight, its needles gleaming faintly. For the first time, Ren felt as though it were not simply a tree, but a watcher waiting. He climbed slowly, his sandals slipping slightly on the damp earth. By the time he reached the top, his breath was quick. Yet the view stole it away again. Below, the village lay spread across the valley, tiled roofs, curling smoke, the river threading silver through the fields. Beyond them rose the mountains, still capped with snow. Ren sat beneath the pine, his back against its trunk. The bark was rough, but it carried a warmth that surprised him, as if the tree held within it the memory of countless suns. He closed his eyes. The wind moved gently through the needles above, a sound softer than water, softer than words. For reasons he could not explain, Ren felt at peace. It was not the same as lying in his futon at night, nor the comfort of his mother's voice. It was deeper, quieter. He sat for a long while, listening. Days passed, and he returned again and again. At first, he came with no purpose, merely to sit. Later, he began bringing small things: a rice ball wrapped in cloth, a notebook, a smooth stone he found by the river. He would eat, or write clumsy words, or simply hold the stone while leaning against the pine. Sometimes children ran past him, laughing. Sometimes an elder climbed up slowly, and Ren would bow respectfully before giving them space. But often, he was alone with the tree. The villagers noticed. His mother smiled knowingly but said little. His father, when home, raised an eyebrow. "You've been going to the hill often, haven't you?" he asked one evening while repairing his fishing net. Ren hesitated. Yes. His father's hands paused in their work. He looked at his son with an expression caught between curiosity and memory. "Good. The pine has seen more than any of us. Listen to it, even if it says nothing." Ren did not fully understand, but he nodded. That night, he dreamt of standing beneath the pine in moonlight, the branches swaying though no wind stirred. He awoke with the image still sharp in his mind. From then on, the hill was not just a place. It was a path, a quiet path leading somewhere within him. And the pine, silent as ever, waited each time he came. Chapter 2: Whispers of the Elders. The hill soon became part of Ren's rhythm, though he never thought of it as a habit. Each visit was different. The sky changed, the light shifted, and the sounds of the village below rose and fell with the days. Yet always the pine stood, silent, steady, and welcoming. One late afternoon, as Ren sat beneath the tree, he heard the slow crunch of sandals on the slope. He looked up and saw Elder Haru approaching. Haru was the oldest man in the village, his back bent like a bow, his beard long and white. Children often whispered about him, saying he had lived so long because the pine lent him its years. Ren stood and bowed. "Good evening, Elder." Haru's eyes, clouded with age yet sharp as winter frost, studied the boy. "So, you come here often, do you?" "Yes," Ren answered softly. The elder lowered himself carefully to the ground beside the pine, his breath slow and measured. "When I was your age, I too came here. Not many do, at first. The young run through fields, chase fireflies, and laugh in the river. But some are called here sooner." Ren listened, unsure whether to speak. The elder's voice carried the weight of something more than memory. "The pine has always been here," Haru continued, resting his wrinkled hand against the trunk. "My grandfather told me his own grandfather sat beneath it. And yet, it remains unchanged. Storms break branches in the forest. Shrines fall, rebuilt again and again. But this pine," he tapped the bark lightly, "it endures. Do you know why?" Ren shook his head. "Because it does not fight time. It accepts it. Snow comes, and it bears the snow. The sun comes, and it bears the sun. That is why the villagers call it Shizuka no Matsu. Silence is its strength." The elder's gaze wandered toward the valley, where smoke rose gently from cooking fires. "If you listen long enough, boy, you may hear something in its silence. Not words as we speak, but something deeper. A knowing." Ren looked up into the branches, where the fading light caught on needles, turning them gold. He strained his ears, hearing only the whisper of wind. Yet in that whisper, he sensed a pattern he could not name, like a song just beyond memory. "Elder Haru," Ren asked at last, "have you heard it?" The old man smiled faintly. "I have heard many things. The cries of children who are now long gone, the laughter of lovers now ancestors, the prayers of the sick, the tears of the lonely. All of it carried here, gathered by the pine. Perhaps that is what I hear." They sat together until dusk deepened. When Ren finally rose to leave, he felt the pine's shadow lingering with him, as though it had followed into his very breath. The days turned warmer. Cicadas began their endless cries in the trees near the village. Ren continued his visits, and now he sometimes found other elders there. Some came to rest, some to offer small offerings of rice or sake at the roots, as if the pine were a shrine itself. One afternoon, Elder Seo, a woman with hair white as snow but eyes bright as morning dew, came up the hill. She carried a small bundle of incense. Ren bowed as she passed, but she beckoned him closer. "You sit here often, young one," she said gently. "Have you wondered why the pine stands alone? Why no other trees grow beside it?" Ren had not thought deeply about it. I don't know. Seo lit the incense and placed it carefully in the soil at the base of the tree. Smoke drifted upward, curling among the roots. Long ago, it is said, a shrine stood here. A shrine to a mountain spirit, who guarded our village. But the shrine was forgotten, weathered away. Only the pine remained, planted perhaps as a marker. Some say the spirit moved into the pine itself, and so it watches over us still. Ren's eyes widened. Then it's sacred? Seo nodded. Sacred, yes, but not in the way of temples with bells and priests. Sacred in the way of mountains and rivers, of stones and wind. Sacred because it endures, and because it reminds us of what passes. Her words sank deep into Ren's heart. He looked at the pine anew, not just as a tree, but as a vessel of memory, of spirit, of something larger than himself. When Seo left, Ren remained long into the night. The moon rose, silvering the needles. He thought of the lost shrine, of forgotten prayers, of the generations who had sat here before him. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with voices he could not hear, but could somehow feel. The next morning, Ren told his mother what the elders had said. She smiled, folding a cloth in her hands. "Yes," she said. "When I was a girl, I too climbed there and wondered. Your grandmother told me the pine was our guardian. Whether spirit or not, it has always been here. Perhaps it waits for those who need it." Ren asked, "Do you think I need it?" His mother paused. Then she touched his cheek gently. "Every heart needs a place to rest. Perhaps the pine is yours." Ren carried her words with him that day, and when he next climbed the hill, he felt the silence embrace him more strongly than before. Chapter 3: Seasons around the pine. The pine stood unchanged, yet the world around it shifted with the seasons. For Ren, each visit revealed new colors, scents, and sounds, as though the tree were teaching him the rhythm of time itself. Spring blossoms and beginnings. When spring came, the hill was crowned with cherry blossoms. Though no trees bloomed at the very top, the path leading upward was lined with pale pink petals drifting down like snow. Ren often paused to watch them scatter, some caught in the breeze, others resting softly on the grass. When he reached the pine, he noticed how petals sometimes landed on its needles, clinging there until the wind brushed them away. Sitting beneath its shade, Ren whispered, "Do you envy the blossoms, pine? They are beautiful, but they fall so quickly. You remain." Of course, the pine did not answer, but Ren thought of Elder Haru's words, silence as its strength. Perhaps beauty was not only in blossoms that dazzled and vanished, but also in what endured quietly, holding memory. That spring, Ren felt lighter. He spent more time helping his mother in the fields, and when the work was done, he would climb to the pine, carrying a rice ball wrapped in cloth. Eating beneath its branches, with petals swirling in the wind, he felt as though he shared his meal with something timeless. Summer heat and restlessness. Summer pressed heavily on the land. The air buzzed with cicadas, and the earth smelled of grass and damp soil. The hill grew thick with green, and even the pine seemed deeper in color. Wren sometimes arrived at the pine, soaked with sweat, panting from the climb. He would throw himself down at its roots, listening to the chorus of insects, the hum of life rising in waves. Yet summer also stirred restlessness in him. He wondered what lay beyond the hills, what rivers and towns existed far away. He asked the pine one afternoon, "Have you seen more than this village? Do you know what lies beyond?" The pine, unmoved, stood silent. But in the hush between cicada cries, Wren felt as though it answered, "You do not need to hurry. The world comes to those who are patient." Still, his young heart wrestled with both longing and contentment. He began to understand that silence did not mean stillness, it meant waiting, gathering strength. Autumn crimson and reflection. When autumn came, the hills blazed with red and gold. The stone bridge in the village was covered with fallen leaves, and children ran across it, laughing, scattering them into the air. Wren found himself watching the pine more closely that season. Though other trees flamed bright, only to bare themselves by winter, the pine remained steadfast. Its needles kept their green, offering shelter to the birds that perched upon its branches. Elder Sao met Wren one crisp morning at the foot of the hill. She smiled knowingly. "Ah, you come to see the pine even in autumn. Do you not find it plain, next to the maples?" Wren shook his head. "The maples are beautiful, but they vanish. The pine is always here. That is comforting." Sao's eyes softened. "You are learning, child. The beauty of what endures is no less than the beauty of what changes. Both remind us of time." That day, Wren stayed long into dusk. The wind carried fallen leaves across the hill, some catching in the pine's roots, some lifted again into the sky. He felt as though the pine gathered them gently, as a teacher gathers scattered words, holding them until they faded back into the soil. Winter silence and stillness. Winter fell like a hush over the land. Snow blanketed the fields, the village roofs, and the paths leading to the hill. Few people ventured out in the cold, yet Wren found himself drawn to the pine more than ever. Climbing the hill was difficult, his feet sinking into drifts, breath clouding in the air. When he finally reached the top, he was astonished by the sight. The pine stood cloaked in white. Its branches bowed but unbroken, each needle tipped with frost that glimmered like glass in the pale sun. Wren sat at its roots, shivering, but unwilling to leave. The silence was absolute. No cicadas, no rustling leaves, no distant voices from the village. Only the pine, the snow, and the sound of his own heart. In that stillness, Wren felt something shift within him. He realized the pine was not merely watching over the village, it was teaching. Patience, endurance, quiet strength. Lessons woven not in words but in presence. He whispered into the cold air, "Thank you, pine. I will remember." A year's turning. By the time spring returned, Wren was no longer the same boy who had first wandered up the hill. The seasons had moved through him, just as they had moved around the pine. He noticed now how villagers sometimes looked at him differently. Children asked him about the hill. Elders smiled when they saw him walking with measured steps. His mother, too, saw the change in his eyes, though she said nothing. Ren himself felt no need to boast. The pine had taught him strength was not loud, wisdom was not hurried. It was enough to sit, to watch, to remember. And so, as the cherry blossoms fell again on the path, Ren knew he would continue climbing the hill, season after season, year after year, until perhaps one day he too became part of the pine's silence. Chapter 4: The Storm and the Stillness. The summer that followed brought not only heat but also storms. At first, they came as brief showers, sweeping through the village in the afternoons and leaving behind a fresh scent of wet earth. But one evening, black clouds gathered in a way Ren had never seen before, rolling like waves across the sky. And the elders whispered that it would be a night to test the strength of both roofs and hearts. The gathering of the storm. Ren stood at the edge of the village, staring up at the hill. The pine was only a dark silhouette against the swirling sky, yet even from that distance, he felt its presence, calm and unwavering. "Stay inside tonight," his mother urged, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The winds will be dangerous." But Ren's thoughts lingered on the pine. Will it endure? Will it stand through the fury of the storm as it always has? As night fell, the wind began to roar, tearing at shutters and rattling doors. Rain lashed against the walls, and lightning split the sky. The entire village seemed to tremble. Ren lay awake, listening to the storm's rage. His heart pounded not from fear of his own house but from worry for the pine. It had become more than a tree to him. It was a teacher, a companion, a silent guardian. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, Ren rose, wrapped himself in a cloak, and slipped out into the storm. The ascent in darkness. The path up the hill was treacherous. Rain turned the soil to mud, and branches whipped in the wind. Ren stumbled more than once, scraping his hands on stones. But he pressed forward, guided by flashes of lightning that illuminated the path for mere heartbeats at a time. The higher he climbed, the stronger the wind grew. It howled through the trees, bending them nearly to the ground. Ren imagined he could hear voices in the storm, 1,000 angry spirits crying out. At last, gasping, he reached the summit. There it was, the pine. Its branches thrashed, its trunk groaned under the force of the wind, but it did not yield. Even as lesser trees around it bent or broke, the pine stood firm, its roots clinging deep into the earth. Each flash of lightning revealed it as a dark, defiant figure against the chaos. Ren stumbled to its base, pressing himself against the trunk for shelter. Soaked and shivering, he wrapped his arms around its bark. "I am here," he whispered through chattering teeth. "You are not alone." The eye of the storm. For a moment, the storm eased as though pausing to take breath. In that strange lull, Ren felt the pine's stillness enter him. He closed his eyes and listened, not to the rage outside, but to the quiet pulse within the tree, steady and enduring. He realized then the pine was not merely resisting the storm. It was part of it, bending where it must, holding where it could, yet never losing its center. Ren pressed his forehead to the trunk. "Teach me that strength," he murmured. "Teach me how to bend, but not break." And though no words came, he felt an answer in the silence. Strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to remain. The storms passing. When dawn broke, the winds had calmed, and the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. The village stirred cautiously, emerging to see what damage the night had wrought. Roofs had lost tiles, fences had toppled, and branches lay scattered across the ground. Ren, exhausted but unhurt, descended from the hill slowly. His clothes were torn, his body bruised, but his eyes carried a new depth. Villagers who saw him returning from the pine did not scold, but looked at him with quiet recognition. Elder Haru approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You went to the hill?" Ren nodded. "The pine, it still stands." Haru's gaze drifted upward, to where the lone figure of the tree rose against the clearing sky. A faint smile touched his lips. "Of course it does. And so do you." The stillness after the storm. That evening, Ren returned once more to the hill. The pine's branches still bore the scars of the storm, some needles stripped away, a few limbs bent, but its trunk was firm, and its roots held strong. Sitting beneath it, Ren felt the silence more deeply than ever. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of survival. A silence that spoke of endurance, of lessons carved into the heart through trial. He leaned back against the trunk, letting the cool breeze wash over him. For the first time, he understood that storms were not enemies but teachers, just as the pine was. The pine had not promised safety, nor had it shielded him from the storm's fury. Instead, it had shown him how to endure. And in that, Ren found peace. Chapter 5: Echoes of the Pine. The passing of seasons. Years slipped quietly through the village like water winding down the valley stream. The storm that had once seemed so immense was remembered now only in stories told around hearth fires. Roofs had been rebuilt, fields restored, lives mended. Yet for Ren, its memory was not a tale of ruin but a turning point, a moment when he first understood the silent teaching of the pine. As he grew, the boy who once clung to the tree in fear became a young man with eyes as steady as the mountain's horizon. He worked in the fields by day, his hands hardened by soil and sun, but his evenings often drew him back to the hill. The villagers, seeing his quiet strength, came to respect him in ways that surprised even Ren. They sought his counsel in small matters, whether to plant a row of rice sooner, or how to repair a roof beam. At first, he felt unworthy of their trust. But then he recalled the pine rooted, enduring, silent in its guidance. He realized he did not need to speak loudly or command authority. His stillness was enough. The child who wandered, One spring, when the cherry blossoms had just begun to scatter like pale snow, a child wandered into the forest. Her name was Emmy, no older than 6, curious and restless. By the time her absence was noticed, dusk had fallen, and worry spread quickly through the village. Ren joined the search. Lantern in hand, he moved quietly, listening not just for the child's cries but for the voice of the land itself, the rustle of branches, the shifting of stones. His steps were calm, guided more by patience than haste. At last, he found Emmy sitting beneath a tree, her small hands clutching her knees, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Why did you leave the path?" Ren asked gently as he knelt beside her. "I wanted to see where the sun goes," she murmured, ashamed. Ren smiled softly. "The sun always returns. But paths are easy to lose in the dark." He lifted her into his arms and carried her back toward the village. When they emerged from the forest, the lanterns of the searchers glimmered like fireflies, and Emmy's mother rushed forward, embracing her child with trembling relief. Later, villagers whispered that Ren had guided them with a calm unlike any other, that he had been like the pine on the hill, steady even when the night seemed endless. Lessons beneath the pine. Ren began to bring children with him up the hill, teaching them to sit in silence beneath the pine. At first, they fidgeted, whispering and giggling, unable to bear the quiet. But over time, they grew still, listening to the wind's whispers through the needles, to the rhythm of their own breath. "Do you hear it?" Ren would ask. "What?" they would reply, their young brows furrowed. "The lesson the pine teaches without words." Some claimed they heard strength. Others said they heard patience. A few simply admitted they heard nothing at all. Ren never corrected them. He only smiled and said, "What you hear will change as you grow." In these gatherings, the pine became more than a landmark. It was a silent elder of the village, shaping hearts as it had once shaped Ren's. The voice of the elders. Elder Haru, now aged and stooped, called Ren to his home one autumn evening. The hearth fire crackled softly, casting shadows on the walls. "You have grown much," Haru said, his voice as thin as the wind through dry leaves. "The village sees you as I once saw you, a boy staring up at the hill with wonder. But now, you are more than that. You are part of its strength." Ren bowed his head. "I only try to follow what the pine has shown me." Haru chuckled weakly. "And that is why the pine chose you. Not because you sought greatness, but because you listened." The elder's words stayed with Ren long after Haru's passing in the winter that followed. He realized then that just as the pine stood rooted through storms and seasons, so too must he stand not for himself, but for those who looked to him for guidance. Echoes in the quiet. Years deepened into decades. Ren's hair darkened, then slowly silvered. His steps grew slower, but his presence never wavered. Children who once sat with him beneath the pine grew into adults, teaching their own children the way of silence. The pine remained, scarred but unbroken, its branches spreading wider with each passing year. And whenever Wren leaned against its trunk, he felt the echoes of his younger self, the boy who once trembled in the storm, the youth who found peace in stillness. He understood now that life was not unlike the pine's existence. To endure was not merely to survive storms but to carry their lessons forward, letting their echoes shape those who would come after. And so, in the quiet of the evening, with crickets beginning their song and the village lanterns glowing below, Wren whispered to the pine, "Your roots are mine, and through me, your strength will not be forgotten." The pine, silent as always, swayed gently in the night breeze. But Wren felt its answer in the stillness, as he always had. Epilogue: The silent pine. The village lay quiet beneath the veil of early winter. Frost glittered on the rooftops, and the fields, long since harvested, stretched like pale blankets under the moon's gentle light. On the hill above, the pine stood as it always had, its branches brushing the sky, its roots unseen yet holding firm to the earth. Wren, now an old man, climbed the familiar path once more. His breath was shallow, his steps measured, yet his eyes were steady. Children often offered to walk with him, but tonight he wished for solitude, just him and the pine, as it had been in the beginning. When he reached the summit, the village spread below like a constellation of lanterns. The air was sharp, carrying the faint fragrance of smoke from evening fires. Wren leaned against the pine's trunk, feeling the roughness of its bark against his palm. "How many seasons have we seen together?" he whispered. "How many storms, how many blossoms, how many farewells?" The pine did not answer, yet Wren felt its presence deep within him, as though the silence itself was a language. He closed his eyes and remembered his childhood wonder, the storm that nearly swept him away. The villagers who turned to him for guidance, the children who learned to listen. All of it was here, in the quiet embrace of this place. A soft wind stirred, rustling the needles above. The sound was the same as it had always been, and yet tonight it seemed to carry something more like a farewell that was not sorrowful, but complete. Wren sank slowly to the ground, his back against the tree. His breath grew slower, his body heavy, but his spirit was light. He thought of the pine's lesson, one he had carried all his life to endure, to remain rooted, to give shelter in silence. As his eyes closed, he murmured, "May those who come after me hear what I once heard, the strength in your stillness." The wind sighed once more through the pine's branches, as if answering. The moon rose higher, bathing both tree and man in silver light. By morning, the villagers found Wren at the foot of the pine, his face calm, as though he were simply sleeping. They carried him down with reverence, their hearts heavy yet full of quiet gratitude. In time, they built a small stone marker at the base of the hill, not as a grave but as a reminder. On it was carved, "Here rests one who listened to the silence." And so the pine remained, season after season, century upon century. Its shadow stretched across generations, its whispers carried in the wind. Children continued to climb the hill, to sit beneath its branches, and to hear what words could not teach. They said the pine was never truly silent, that if one listened with the heart, they could hear the echo of Wren's footsteps, and the quiet strength he had passed on. The hill endured, the pine endured, and so too did the lessons of stillness, patience, and resilience. And in every breath of wind through the needles, the spirit of both man and tree lived on, eternal as the mountain's horizon. Twilight along the bamboo path. Prologue. The whisper of twilight. The path appeared only when the light softened. In the harsh brightness of noon, it was nothing more than a narrow trail pressed between thick walls of bamboo. A corridor of pale green trunks that seemed endless and impassable. But as twilight descended, when the sun lowered beyond the rice fields and its glow spilled like amber ink through the stems, the path transformed. It became a passageway of shadows and light, each bamboo pole catching the last fragments of the day. Their slender leaves swayed gently, and the movement of the air was enough to scatter whispers along the path, whispers that sounded like words, but faded whenever one strained to hear them. Kenji, a boy of 14, had heard about this path since his earliest days. His grandmother spoke of it with a certain reverence, as though the path itself was alive, an elder older than the village itself. She said the bamboo carried voices of those who had walked before, and that if one listened carefully at twilight, a traveler might hear a truth meant only for them. That evening, as the lanterns were being lit in the village below, Kenji found himself standing at the mouth of the bamboo corridor. The sky above was neither day nor night, a gradient of lavender and soft gray. He hesitated, his hand brushing against the first stalk, cool to the touch, steady and silent. The whispers rose again, subtle as breath. Kenji took his first step into the twilight of the bamboo path. Chapter 1. The Path Revealed. Kenji had walked many roads in his young life, paths along the irrigation canals, stony trails leading into the foothills, winding lanes between fields of barley and rice. Yet the bamboo path felt different the moment he entered it. The air cooled instantly. The tall stalks rose like green pillars, straight and unyielding, their heights so immense that they seemed to pierce the sky. Above, their crowns knit together to form a ceiling of delicate leaves, letting in only threads of fading light. The ground beneath his feet was smooth with packed earth, sprinkled with fallen leaves that crunched softly beneath each step. He felt small, as though the bamboo grove were a temple and he, an uninvited guest. The whispers grew louder the deeper he walked. They were not voices in the ordinary sense, more like the susurrus of wind, a faint rattling of hollow stems brushing against each other. Sometimes he thought he could distinguish words: stay, listen, remember. But the moment he tried to focus, they dissolved again into nothing. Kenji's grandmother's words echoed in his mind. The bamboo holds memory. Not your memory or mine, but the memory of the earth itself. When you walk there, you are never alone. He shivered, though the air was not cold. Halfway down the path, he stopped. Before him the grove seemed endless, stretching forward with no bend, no visible end. Yet he knew from the stories that it was not long at all, just a short corridor linking the fields on one side of the village with the riverbank on the other. Why, then, did it feel as though it expanded before him, lengthening with each step? A sound broke the silence, the clack of bamboo knocking against bamboo, sharp like wooden bells. He turned his head and glimpsed a movement deeper in the grove, a shadow shifting between the stalks. His heart thudded, but no figure emerged. Only the wind teased the leaves. He pressed forward, determined not to let fear dictate his pace. The path widened slightly, and in the dim light he saw a small stone lantern, its surface etched with moss. It stood crooked, as if forgotten, but something about it radiated a quiet watchfulness. Kneeling before it, Kenji brushed away some of the leaves that had gathered at its base. Beneath them he found an inscription, half buried and worn by time. He could not read the characters fully, but he recognized one, the kanji for light. A voice clearer than before slid through the air: "Do not fear the shadows. They guide the way." Kenji leapt back, his breath caught in his throat. This was no mere wind, no imagined whisper. The words had formed, deliberate and audible. Yet no one stood near, no figure hid in the grove. His pulse raced. Should he turn back? Run to the safety of the village, where the hearth fires glowed and human voices filled the night? And yet something within him, a deep stirring he could not name, urged him onward. He rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He walked again, step by step, until the bamboo thinned and the last stretch of twilight opened before him. Beyond lay the river, silver under the first stars, and the faint lights of fireflies beginning to dance above the reeds. He emerged from the path, but his mind lingered behind among the whispers and the endless stalks. For the first time, Kenji understood why his grandmother's voice grew hushed whenever she spoke of this place. The bamboo path was not merely a trail through the village grove. It was a threshold, a boundary between the known and the unseen, between the day's fading light and the secrets held in twilight. And now that he had entered it, he knew he would return. Chapter 2: The Keeper of the Lanterns. The next day passed in a haze of questions that Kenji could not answer. At school, while the other children recited lessons or played in the yard, his mind wandered back to the bamboo path. He could still hear the voice, unmistakable in its clarity: "Do not fear the shadows. They guide the way." Had he truly heard it? Or was it some trick of the wind, shaped by the hollow trunks? His grandmother always said that twilight was a threshold between the ordinary and the unseen. Perhaps, in stepping onto the path at that hour, he had crossed into a space where the two worlds touched. That evening, as the village prepared supper and smoke rose from the chimneys, Kenji's steps carried him again toward the bamboo grove. The sky was brushed with gold and pink, but darker hues pressed at the edges. His grandmother, noticing his distracted air, had merely said, "If you go, go with respect." Her words gave him courage. The bamboo seemed even taller this time, their stalks straight as spears, their crowns swaying gently against the last of the light. The whispers began almost immediately, but Kenji did not shrink back. He walked steadily, each footfall careful, until he reached the crooked stone lantern he had found the night before. It was no longer dark and empty. A faint glow pulsed within, like an ember refusing to die. Kenji crouched closer, drawn by the warmth. And then he saw him. A figure stepped lightly from the shadows, an old man, bent but not frail, his robes simple and gray as river stones. His hair, long and silver, shimmered in the fading light. He carried a staff tipped with a small lantern, unlit yet radiant with some inner glow. Kenji froze. The man regarded him with eyes both kind and piercing. "So," he said softly, his voice like the rustle of leaves, "you have heard the path speak." Kenji swallowed hard. You spoke to me?" The old man smiled faintly. "I am but one voice among many. The path itself speaks through us when it chooses. Few listen. Fewer still return." Kenji felt a tremor in his chest. "Who are you?" The man bowed slightly, though his gaze never left Kenji. "Some call me the Keeper of Lanterns. My task is simple: to tend the lights along this path, to ensure that those who walk at twilight are not lost to the shadows." Kenji's eyes flickered to the crooked stone lantern. "You lit this?" The old man chuckled. "The lanterns light themselves when they are remembered. When someone shows reverence, brushes away the leaves, acknowledges their presence, then the flame awakens. You, boy, have already given it breath." Kenji's cheeks warmed. He remembered clearing the leaves away, tracing the inscription. Could such a small act carry such weight? The keeper leaned on his staff. "Tell me, why did you come again? Curiosity? Fear? Or perhaps the voice you heard left an emptiness that must be filled?" Kenji hesitated. The truth felt tangled inside him, yet he answered honestly. "I don't know. I only know I can't forget it. It was different. Like it was meant for me." The keeper nodded slowly, as though he had expected such words. "The path calls to those who carry questions in their hearts. Not the kind answered in books or lessons, but deeper questions, the kind that linger even when one is silent. You are young, yet your steps have already brought you here. That is no accident." Kenji wanted to ask more, but the keeper raised a hand. "Listen." The grove hushed. The whispers rose, weaving through the bamboo like threads of sound. This time, Kenji did not strain, he simply listened. The murmur grew clear, forming not words but feelings: calm, patience, belonging. It wrapped around him like a cloak, soothing the restlessness that had driven him there. The keeper spoke softly. "The bamboo remembers. It has stood longer than our lives, longer than the village, perhaps. Each breeze carries echoes of those who once walked here: farmers, travelers, children, elders. Their steps remain. Their breaths remain. The path holds them all. Kenji shivered, but not from fear. Then when I hear the whispers, I'm hearing them. In part, said the keeper. And in part, you are hearing yourself reflected. The path is a mirror as much as it is a guide. Do you understand? Kenji wasn't sure he did, but he nodded anyway. Something in the keeper's words rang true, even if he could not yet explain it. The old man stepped closer, placing a hand on Kenji's shoulder. His palm was warm, steady, grounding. If you wish to continue walking this path, you must learn to listen not only with your ears but with your heart. That is where the true voice lies. Kenji nodded again, more firmly this time. The keeper smiled, his lantern flaring briefly, though no flame was visible. Good. Then remember this: the path is neither friend nor foe. It will reveal only what you are ready to see. Walk gently, walk with respect, and you will not be lost. Before Kenji could reply, the man turned, his figure blending almost seamlessly into the shadows between the bamboo. Kenji blinked, and he was gone. Only the whispers remained. Kenji stayed by the crooked stone lantern until the stars appeared. The ember within it glowed brighter, casting a gentle light over the ground. He felt no fear now, only a quiet resolve. When he finally stepped out onto the riverbank, the moon had risen, silver and serene. Fireflies swirled above the reeds, echoing the lantern's glow. Kenji thought of the keeper's words: the path reveals only what you are ready to see. He realized that this was only the beginning. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Ancestors. The following days unfolded with a rhythm both ordinary and strange. Kenji still rose at dawn, helped his grandmother sweep the porch, and carried water from the well. He still attended lessons with the other children, tracing kanji on rough paper with a brush and ink. Yet beneath all these daily motions, a current ran deep: the pull of the bamboo path. Each evening, when the light began to soften, Kenji found excuses to wander near the grove. He never told his grandmother exactly where he went, but she seemed to sense it anyway. Her eyes, clouded with age yet sharp with memory, followed him as he left, and her voice would drift after him. Walk gently, Kenji. The evening remembers. He did not know whether she meant the same thing the keeper had said, or whether it was just one of her many sayings, shaped by the years. But each time he heard it, his resolve grew stronger. The path never looked quite the same twice. One night, the bamboo leaned as though bowing in solemn greeting. Another night, moonlight filtered through in silver spears, painting shifting patterns across the ground. The crooked stone lantern always appeared in its place, but Kenji began to notice others half buried, leaning, hidden behind clusters of trunks. Each bore an inscription. Each seemed alive with quiet expectation. And sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, Kenji thought he caught the whisper of voices, some low and heavy with age, others bright as laughter. On the third evening since meeting the keeper, Kenji felt the air change as soon as he stepped onto the path. It was cooler than before, with a fragrance of earth and something faintly sweet, like incense burned long ago. He walked slowly, ears open. Tonight the whispers grew stronger, not as one voice but as a chorus. They overlapped and tangled, like the sound of many streams running together. Kenji paused, uncertain. "Do not fear," came the keeper's voice. Kenji turned and there he was again, emerging from the shadows with a lantern in hand. Its glow seemed stronger, though the flame within remained invisible. "Keeper," Kenji blurted, then flushed at his own boldness. The old man's eyes softened with amusement. "So eager, this one. You hear them, don't you?" Kenji nodded. "There are so many voices. I can't tell what they're saying. They are not meant to be understood with words," the keeper said. "They are the echoes of those who walked here before us, your ancestors, my ancestors, all who carried their lives along this path. Some carried burdens, others hopes. All left traces. The bamboo remembers them." Kenji looked around, awe widening his eyes. "My ancestors here? Perhaps," said the keeper. "Every step taken in reverence lingers. Every breath offered in gratitude remains. You are connected to them whether you recognize it or not." Kenji felt a warmth in his chest, different from the glow of the lantern. He thought of his grandmother, of the stories she sometimes told about the village's past. Farmers laboring in the fields. Children running with wooden toys. Travelers who stopped to rest by the river. Could their voices still echo here, centuries later? The keeper lowered his staff, the lantern's glow brushing against the nearest bamboo stalk. "Would you like to hear them more clearly?" Kenji's breath caught. "Yes." The old man motioned for him to kneel. Kenji obeyed, resting his palms against the cool earth. The keeper began to murmur words that did not belong to any prayer Kenji had ever heard, a cadence older than the temple chants. The bamboo seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Then, like a curtain drawn aside, the chorus of whispers sharpened. Kenji gasped. He heard laughter first, bright and high, as though children were playing nearby. Then a low hum, like a lullaby carried by a mother's voice. Then footsteps, steady and deliberate. The sounds came not from his ears but from somewhere deeper, vibrating through his bones. Among them rose one voice clearer than the rest, a man's, gentle yet firm. "Tend the fields with patience, for the earth answers kindness with abundance." Kenji's heart pounded. He did not know who the man was, yet the words struck him with familiarity, as though he had always known them. Another voice followed, an elder's, soft as falling leaves. "Even in darkness, the lantern remembers light." Kenji shivered. His eyes darted to the crooked stone lantern. Its glow pulsed in response, as if acknowledging the words. Finally, he heard a whisper that seemed directed at him alone. "Kenji, walk without haste. The path is not a race." His breath caught. his name spoken by a voice he did not recognize, yet felt in the marrow of his being. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the chorus receded. The grove returned to its steady rhythm of rustling leaves. Kenji lifted his head, trembling. "Did you hear that? They said my name." The keeper's eyes shone, though his face remained calm. The path speaks to those ready to listen. What it offers is not for me, but for you. Remember their words. Kenji tried to steady his breathing. Were those really my ancestors? The keeper tilted his head. Does it matter? Whether they were yours or another's, the truth they spoke belongs to all who walk this earth. That is the gift of the path. Kenji thought about this long after the keeper faded once again into shadow. That night, lying beneath his grandmother's thatched roof, Kenji could not sleep. He stared at the rafters, listening to the faint chirp of crickets outside. The voices replayed in his mind, especially the one that had spoken his name. Walk without haste. The path is not a race. He did not fully understand, but he felt the weight of it. At school, he was often told to work faster, to catch up with the older boys. In the fields, he sometimes hurried through chores, eager to return to play. Could the path be warning him against that haste? His grandmother stirred beside the hearth. "You are restless, Kenji," she murmured without opening her eyes. Kenji hesitated. Then, softly, "Grandmother, do you believe the bamboo can remember voices?" Her lips curved faintly. "I believe the world remembers everything if we are quiet enough to hear it." "Why do you ask?" Kenji turned toward her, but the words lodged in his throat. He could not yet explain the keeper, or the voices, or the glow of the lantern. Not fully. His grandmother opened her eyes, gaze gentle. "When I was your age, I too walked paths that whispered. The trick is not to chase the voices, but to let them settle in your heart. They will guide you when the time comes." Kenji's breath caught. Did she know? Had she met the keeper, too? But before he could ask, her eyes drifted closed again, her breathing slow and steady. Kenji lay awake long after, the whispers of the path weaving through his dreams. Chapter 4: The Burden of Shadows. The following week, the air in the village changed. Autumn deepened, and with it came a heaviness that clung to every roof tile, every wooden beam, every whisper of the wind. The harvest was nearly complete, yet unease spread quietly among the villagers. Kenji sensed it most in the silences. Neighbors who once greeted each other warmly at the well now exchanged only brief nods. Children who once played with sticks and balls of cloth in the dusty lane laughed less often. Even the temple bell, which rang each morning, seemed subdued, its sound absorbed by the hills before it could travel far. Kenji could not name the cause, but he felt it pressing against his chest. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he walked toward the bamboo grove once more. The moment his feet touched the familiar stone path, he sensed the difference. The air was thicker, colder, as though the grove itself held its breath. The whispers that usually greeted him were absent. The silence was not peaceful this time, it was strained, expectant, as though shadows had gathered just beyond sight. Kenji hesitated. For the first time since discovering the path, fear flickered in his chest. Then he saw it. A shape darker than the dusk, lingering among the bamboo. It was not the keeper. The figure had no lantern, no steady presence. Instead, it seemed to waver and shift, like smoke coiling without fire. Kenji froze. His pulse pounded in his ears. The shadow tilted its head toward him. Though it had no face, he felt its gaze pierce him. Child of the living. The voice was not like the whispers he had heard before. This one was heavy, scraping, as though dragged from a deep well. Kenji stumbled back. Who are you? The shadow's form rippled. One forgotten. One cast aside. While others left their words in reverence, I left only silence. The bamboo remembers me still and I hunger. Kenji's breath caught. He wanted to run, but his legs would not obey. Suddenly, a warm glow bloomed at the edge of the path. The keeper emerged, his lantern blazing brighter than Kenji had ever seen. Its light pushed back the dark, though not entirely. The shadow hissed, recoiling but not vanishing. Enough, the keeper said, his voice firm yet sorrowful. You linger too long in bitterness. The shadow writhed. Why should I fade, while others are remembered? I toiled, I bled, yet no voice of mine lingers in gratitude. Must I vanish into silence? Kenji's fear shifted into something else, pity. The voice carried a pain he could almost understand, the fear of being forgotten, of leaving nothing behind. The keeper raised his staff. The path does not choose who is remembered. It simply reflects what is given. You bound yourself to resentment, and so resentment is what remains. The shadow trembled. Then let me take from the living, and I shall not fade. It surged forward. Kenji cried out, but the keeper thrust the lantern high. Light cascaded in waves, striking the shadow with force. The dark figure shrieked, scattering into fragments that melted among the bamboo stalks. Silence returned. Kenji collapsed to his knees, shaking. What was that? The keeper lowered his lantern, his face grave. Not all echoes are gentle, boy. Some cling to the path out of fear, anger, or longing. They are what you saw, shadows burdened by what they could not release. Kenji's heart hammered. But will it come back? The keeper studied him. Perhaps. Shadows do not vanish easily. Yet you must not let fear guide you. Even burdens, once acknowledged, can be transformed. Kenji swallowed hard, unsure whether he understood. Why did it speak to me? Because you listened, the keeper said softly. And because, in its hunger, it mistook your openness for weakness. Remember this, Kenji, to walk the path is to open your heart, but not to abandon your strength. Kenji clenched his fists. He did not want to be weak. But he also could not shake the sorrow in the shadow's voice. The keeper rested a hand on his shoulder. Do not pity too quickly. Some souls feed endlessly on pity. What they need is not your sorrow, but your steadiness. Kenji nodded faintly, though doubt still churned in him. The lantern dimmed to its usual soft glow. The keeper's expression softened. "Go home, child. Rest. The path will wait." Kenji rose unsteadily. Before leaving, he glanced once more at the bamboo. The grove was still again, but he knew now it was not empty. As he walked back to the village, the words of the shadow haunted him. Must I vanish into silence? That night, as the wind rattled the shutters of his grandmother's house, Kenji lay awake wondering whether he, too, would one day leave nothing behind. Chapter 5: The Lantern's Secret. The days following the shadow's appearance weighed heavily on Kenji. At school, the children's laughter sounded distant, muffled by thoughts that clung to him like mist. When he tried to concentrate on lessons, his mind returned to the bamboo. Past the hiss of the shadow, the sorrow in its voice, the brilliance of the keeper's lantern. At night, he often woke from uneasy dreams. In them, the lantern's glow flickered, and the shadow whispered endlessly. "Do not let me vanish, do not let me vanish." Each time he awoke, the sound of the wind outside seemed to echo those words. One evening, unable to endure the silence of his room, Kenji slipped quietly from the house. His grandmother, sitting by the hearth, only looked up briefly and said, "Go with respect." She no longer tried to stop him. Perhaps she knew that the path had claimed him in some way. The bamboo grove received him with its usual hush, but tonight the whispers were softer, almost hesitant. Kenji walked steadily until he reached the crooked stone lantern. To his surprise, the keeper was already there, sitting cross-legged on the moss. The lantern beside him glowed warmly, casting his face in shifting light. "You came," the keeper said, as though he had expected nothing less. Kenji nodded. I had to." The old man's eyes studied him quietly. "The shadow troubles you still." Kenji lowered his gaze. It said it didn't want to be forgotten. "I keep thinking, what if that happens to me? What if one day, no one remembers I was here?" The keeper's expression softened. He gestured for Kenji to sit. "That fear is not new, boy. Even emperors and poets feared it. Some built monuments, some carved words into stone, and others left songs or prayers. But tell me, what is it you wish to leave behind?" Kenji hesitated. He had never thought about it clearly. "I don't know. I'm just me. I don't have anything special." The keeper leaned closer, his lantern glowing brighter. "The path teaches this: to be remembered is not only to carve your name in history. It is to live so that your kindness, your courage, your presence leave traces in the hearts of others." "Do you see?" Kenji blinked. "So even small things matter?" "Especially the small things," the keeper said firmly. "The way you clear leaves from a forgotten lantern, the way you listen to voices others ignore, these acts light flames that endure long after." Kenji's chest stirred with a quiet warmth. For the first time, the idea of being forgotten seemed less frightening. The keeper lifted his lantern, holding it out. "Do you wish to know its secret?" Kenji's eyes widened. "You'll tell me?" The old man nodded. "This lantern, like the others along the path, does not burn with oil or flame. Its light is born from memory. Each soul that walks here, each act of reverence, feeds it. When people forget, it dims. When they remember, it shines." Kenji reached out cautiously, his fingers hovering near the lantern's glow. It was warm but not hot, like touching sunlight through water. "It feels alive," he whispered. The keeper's eyes glimmered. "It is alive. Not as we are, with flesh and breath, but as a vessel of spirit. These lanterns keep the path lit not for the living alone, but for those who have passed, so they may walk beside us unseen." Kenji's breath caught. "Then when I heard the whispers, were they?" "Yes," the keeper said gently. "They were those who came before. Not bound in sorrow like the shadow you saw, but resting, remembering, leaving traces of themselves so the living would not forget them." Kenji felt a shiver of awe. "Then if no one remembers, the light goes out?" The keeper's gaze grew distant. "That is the burden I carry. To tend the lanterns, to keep the light alive, even when memory fades." Kenji studied the man in silence. His robes, though plain, bore stains of soil and ash. His hands were lined, strong but weary. He had likely walked this path for years, decades, perhaps alone in his duty. "Isn't it lonely?" Kenji asked softly. The keeper smiled faintly, though his eyes did not. "It is. But loneliness is the price of devotion. The path must remain lit, whether or not others walk it." Kenji's throat tightened. He thought of his grandmother, sitting by the hearth, tending quietly to her own rituals without complaint. Was she, too, carrying a devotion that few noticed? The keeper rose slowly, his lantern casting long shadows on the moss. "Kenji," he said, "you are still young. You need not bear such burdens yet. But the path has chosen to reveal itself to you, which means you carry a seed. What you do with it will shape not only your steps, but the path itself." Kenji looked up at him, uncertain yet determined. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." The keeper placed the lantern gently in his hands. Its glow flared, steady and warm. "You are stronger than you think," the old man said. "The path does not seek perfection. Only sincerity." Kenji clutched the lantern, feeling its weight not heavy, but profound. In that moment, he sensed that he was holding more than light. He was holding memory itself. The keeper's voice lowered. "One day, this duty may pass to you. Until then, remember every step taken with care, every act done with respect, feeds the light. That is how shadows are kept at bay." Kenji nodded, his heart pounding. When the keeper took the lantern back, Kenji felt a sudden emptiness in his hands, as though a piece of him had been returned to the grove. The old man smiled. "Now go. Dawn is near, and your grandmother waits." As Kenji walked home beneath the paling stars, he no longer feared the question that had haunted him. Yes, one day he would fade, as all did. But while he walked, while he breathed, while he tended even the smallest flame, he could ensure that the path remained lit for those who came after. For the first time, he felt not only called by the whispers, but part of them. Epilogue. Beneath the bamboo sky. Winter crept gently into the valley. The fields lay bare beneath a thin quilt of frost, and the river's song slowed to a hushed murmur. Smoke curled steadily from the chimneys, carrying with it the fragrance of pine and cedar burned to ward off the cold. Kenji, wrapped in a patched but warm coat, walked once more toward the bamboo path. The air was crisp, each breath forming a pale cloud before his face. Though months had passed since his first trembling steps into the grove, he now carried himself with quiet assurance. The bamboo stood serene, dusted with powdery snow, their stalks rising like silent guardians. As he entered, the whispers returned soft, layered, carrying echoes of those who had walked before. This time, he did not strain to hear them. He simply listened, letting their cadence mingle with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He reached the crooked stone lantern. Snow had gathered on its roof, but the flame within glowed steadily, undimmed by the cold. Kenji brushed the snow away with careful hands, bowing slightly in respect. For a moment, he thought he saw the keeper standing there, lantern in hand, his silver hair shimmering. But when he blinked, only the grove remained. Still, the warmth in his chest told him the keeper's presence lingered, whether as spirit, memory, or the path itself, Kenji could not say. The boy closed his eyes. He remembered the shadow that had once hissed in bitterness, the sorrow it carried. He remembered, too, the keeper's words, every act done with respect feeds the light. Bending down, Kenji placed a small offering, a sprig of pine, a single grain of rice before the lantern. Simple, perhaps, but sincere. The flame flickered, brightened, and steadied again. A breeze stirred the grove, shaking loose tiny cascades of snow. The sound of the bamboo swaying blended with the whispers until it seemed the forest itself was breathing with him. Kenji opened his eyes to the twilight sky above, a pale moon rising between the slender stalks. He smiled. The path would always carry shadows. But as long as he, and others after him, tended even the smallest flame, light would remain. And somewhere, beyond the reach of sight, the keeper of lanterns surely watched, his duty not ended but shared. That evening, when Kenji returned to his grandmother's house, she looked up from the hearth fire. "You've been walking the path again," she said softly. Kenji nodded. Her eyes, filled with both wisdom and affection, studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. "Good. The path needs listeners. And so does the world." Kenji sat by her side, the warmth of the fire mingling with the warmth he carried within. Outside, the bamboo grove swayed in the winter wind, its whispers rising to the sky like prayers. The lanterns glowed unseen, steady as stars, their light a bridge between past and present, shadow and flame. And in that quiet, eternal exchange, Kenji understood the path was no longer just a place he walked. It was a part of him.